Welcome to Citizen Diplomacy International's latest meeting, this one on culinary diplomacy. I'm going to be sharing with you some information in the Zoom chat. You should be introducing yourselves, and so I'm going to share some information about what you should be sharing with us. Um, One of our interns, Adrian Mata, is with us, and Adrian just raised his hand. Um, he is going to be tracking who is in the meeting. He particularly needs your first name, your last name, your city, your country, and your email. So please provide those if you would in the Zoom chat now. Your name, so first name, last name, city, country, and your email. If you, for some reason, don't want to share your email out with this group of folks here, you can privately message Adrian Mata, and I'm going to put his name in here, but you should see him on screen. That's Adrian's name, and you can share with him there. So let me share some information with you first here. Okay, so. I think most of you know who I am, but I'm the founder and the director of Learning Life. We're a DC, Washington, DC based nonprofit that runs Citizen Diplomacy International, and I chair these quarterly meetings. As I mentioned, please introduce yourself. By all means, share more than just your name, your city, your country. You can also share your occupation. You can copy your bio into this, and you can copy any links to information about you or things that you would like to encourage people to learn more about related to citizen diplomacy. So by all means, post that in the Zoom chat. Um, I am going to give you a little bit of information about citizen diplomacy um, in the Zoom chat now. So about Citizen Diplomacy International in particular, but there are a growing number of reasons why citizen diplomacy seems to be a burgeoning field across the world. And one of them is, of course, globalization, this increasing political and economic interdependence, the rise of the internet. We also have rising educational levels, which essentially give people more agency and more interest in the wider world, and hence encourage the development of citizen diplomacy. Um, and so, for all those reasons, Citizen Diplomacy International is devoted to trying to encourage the advancement and the promotion and support for citizen diplomacy across the world to essentially increase citizen agency in international relations. Um, so, primarily right now through Citizen Diplomacy International is these four quarterly meetings that we have. I'll give you more details about our upcoming meetings at the end of this. But if you're not on our email list, I encourage you to join the email list. So that's the next batch of information I'm going to give you here in the Zoom chat. So as you see here in the Zoom chat, I've laid out a few things. If you have any questions for us, you can email us. If you're interested in getting these notices about these quarterly meetings of Citizen Diplomacy International, please fill out that link at bit.ly CD Bulletin. That will give you notice of these meetings and then the results of these meetings. So photos, video, etc., that we share after the meetings from the meeting. There is also a Facebook group and a LinkedIn group that you can join to connect with other people across the world who are interested in citizen diplomacy and to share what you are doing related to citizen diplomacy. And for the latest meetings, or for any of our meetings, if you want to see prior meetings, you can visit our YouTube channel. And lastly, if you're interested in kind of joining our community, the last link there is to our democracy and diplomacy community with more information about all the benefits of joining that community. So I'm glad to see that a number of you are already introducing yourselves. Please do. And I just want to remind you, Adrian needs your name, your email, your city, and your country, if you would. So your first and last name and your email and your city and your country. This meeting, I should note, is video recorded if you haven't noticed. We will be taking photos. In fact, Kira, if you could, Kira's one of our interns as well. If you could take, and Lucine, both of you, if you can take screenshots throughout of the presentations, of the slides, of all of us. I will be taking momentarily a photo of all of us, and we'll then get started. I think that's it for announcements. So let me take that photo and then I'm going to introduce our speakers, and each of our speakers will be speaking for 10 minutes, and then we'll have discussion around culinary diplomacy. Okay, so if you would turn on your cameras, if you don't have your cameras on, it's always good to have your camera on because we know then you're paying attention. And also, it's a lot more social for us to be able to see you. So I'm going to take a photo on three. If you could smile, one, two, three, smile. Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'm going to take another photo because it looks like, so hold on a second. Let me take another photo because it looks like some of you were looking down. So if you can just look up and smile at the camera. One, two, three, smile. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, so I think we are set to introduce our speakers. So we have three speakers today. Sam Chappell Sokol. Sam, I should have asked you this. Am I pronouncing your name
That's
correctly?
right.
Okay.
That's right. Yep.
um, is joining us from the Jose Andres Group. He is going to be providing an overview of culinary diplomacy. We then have Jennifer Gray, who is a professor at Tennessee Tech University, who is going to be talking about her book on culinary diplomacy as it is represented in memoirs that include some element of culinary diplomacy. And then lastly, my friend and colleague, co-founder of the Fig Tree Alliance, Daniel Moses, is going to be talking about his own grassroots experience doing people-to-people culinary diplomacy, and he's going to be sharing some photos of that. Okay, so without further ado, Sam, you are first, and
Sure thing.
I will time each of you.
Okay. Um, I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Paul, and I'm happy to be chatting about this topic. As Paul introduced, I work. My day job is with Jose Andres and his restaurant group. If you guys don't know who he is, he's a Spanish American chef, restaurateur, humanitarian, founder of the organization World Central Kitchen, which goes into humanitarian crises and natural disaster areas and feeds people to make sure that they can get a hot meal after disasters. I've worked for World Central Kitchen. I wrote the World Central Kitchen cookbook, which came out in 2023, and now I work for Jose and his restaurants. My side gig is that I'm a culinary diplomacy researcher and professor. I'm teaching a course right now at George Washington University. So yesterday's class was actually about citizen culinary diplomacy. So this feels really appropriate to be having this discussion right now. So I can give a broad overview of the field, which can kind of lead into the rest of the discussion. And I'm happy to answer any questions later on and in discussion. But just got a couple of slides to share with you guys. Uh, and if you hear a child in the background, that's my sick 2-year-old, who I think is doing okay. Can you see this?
Yes.
All right. So, what is culinary diplomacy? This is kind of a 35,000 foot view about how I've conceived the field. I started looking at this back in 2011 when I was doing a master's degree at Tufts at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Another of Paul's colleagues named Paul Rockhour and I were two of the first real academics at the time to look into this as an academic field, and Paul recommended me to be here today. So, want to make sure his name is in the discussion. But um, I've been looking at this for a long time, and I'm glad to see that it's grown and there's more and more interest in it. So, this is my original definition. I wrote a paper in 2012 about this topic. Culinary diplomacy is using food and cuisine as instruments to create cross-cultural understanding in the hopes of improving interactions and cooperation. It's pretty broad, and we can discuss more and more about the differences between culinary diplomacy and um, a very related term, gastrodiplomacy, which is also used. That's Paul Rockhour's preferred term. Uh, we can get into that debate. I don't think it's necessarily relevant to our bigger discussion right now, but this is how I've defined the field writ large. Um, these are a couple of great quotes from both French thinkers. Antoine Briat-Savarin was a French food writer and gourmand. He wrote The Physiology of Taste in the 1820s. He wrote that the destiny of nations depends on how they nourish themselves. And then Talleyrand was one of Napoleon's negotiators during the Treaty of Vienna in the 1810s, and he said, "Give me good cooks, and I will give you good treaties." And I feel like these two quotes kind of encapsulate what we're talking about here. Um, as I work through the field, I've come to understand it in three pillars, so that we are all clear what we're talking about. I like to give parameters just so I understand what I'm talking about, and so that I can communicate it effectively. And these three pillars align with what I see as the field of diplomacy writ large. The track one, or official culinary diplomacy, is government to government. This is when we talk about state dinners, dining at embassies or consuls. There's a group called Le Club des Chefs, that image in the beginning, and I'll share it again, is a group of chefs, of heads of state. This has been around for almost 50 years. It's an organization that brings together the chefs of each of heads of state every year to have a meeting, kind of talk about their work. And they're the ones who are feeding the presidents and prime ministers and kings and queens of the world. So it's a really exclusive culinary organization. Um, Public, the second pillar I see as public, or what has in the common parlance become gastrodiplomacy. This is government to foreign public. This is when a government launches a program in order to present themselves in a soft power light, using food as the medium. So there have been some really stellar examples, really important examples, like the Thai Kitchen of the World program, which was launched officially in 2002 and kind of relaunched again in 2018 to promote Thai food, Thai ingredients, Thai chefs, Thai restaurants. And because of this very intentional strategy by the Thai government, there was an explosion of Thai restaurants. I just saw a fact that for every, at least in the United States, and I think this is true globally as well, but for every Thai restaurant in the United States, there are 55 Thai Americans, Thai um, expats, or Thai immigrants, I guess. The number for Mexican restaurants in the United States is one per every 650. So there's an overrepresentation of Thai restaurants in the United States, and that is as a very direct, intentional project by the Thai government. Different governments have taken it a different way. That the Thai project was very much for trade, tourism, very economic. Um, the Korean project is a lot more cultural in foundation, with some trade and tourism built in. The kimchi diplomacy project was in order to export the idea of kimchi being Korean, but exporting it to the globe. The United States launched a program in the second in 2012, and again in 2023 they relaunched, um, which the goal was both to send American chefs abroad to teach about the regional and cultural cuisines of America, as well as to bring American chefs to the White House to cook for state dinners and for state luncheons. So these are all gastrodiplomacy, public diplomacy projects. The third pillar is what we're talking about today, is citizen culinary diplomacy. There are a range of projects. I think we're going to get into those as we go today. I think it's the broadest and least defined of the pillars. World Central Kitchen, the work that I've done in the past, um, kind of borders the line of what I consider food diplomacy, which is using specific calories. This is the kind of work that World Food Program does. Food for Peace, a project of the US government, using actual food aid as a tool of building diplomacy and building goodwill, where World Central Kitchen is doing that, but with a very culturally relevant and thoughtful execution. These are Conflict Kitchen and International Alert. These are projects that used food to teach about uh, folks from across a cultural divide or a conflict divide. So there's often a conflict resolution lens that I've seen in the work of citizen culinary diplomacy, but I'm really interested to hear how the rest of this conversation goes. So here are just a few images. This is a state dinner at the White House a couple of years ago between Biden and Macron. I in a former life, I was a pastry chef at the White House in the Obama administration, so I worked at a state dinner between Obama and Hollande, which was not as fancy as this one. This looks beautiful. This is the Club of Chefs of Heads of State in a visit to the White House in 2013. The woman sitting directly in front of Barack Obama is Christetta Comerford, who was the executive chef of the White House she was working there for 29 years. She just retired last year. Um, Absolutely incredible. To her, as we're looking at it, to her right, Henry Holler was the chef in the 70s and 80s at the White House. And you have representation from the Nordic countries, you have Thailand, you have Sri Lanka, you have Italy, a lot of the Western European countries represented here, and a couple from China. Very cool organization that brings together some of the best chefs in the world that nobody's heard of. This was in 2018. A deputy prime minister, during the relaunch of the Thai Kitchen to the World program, was promoting the idea that Thai food is not just culturally significant and important to the Thai people, but also clean and healthy and safe, and building on the export side of things. So it's very much an economic program. This is the American program that relaunched in the past couple of years. These are chefs from all around the United States, very diverse group to represent American cuisine, from barbecue pits to there are two of these chefs who are indigenous Americans, all sorts of different cuisines represented to show that American food isn't just, the international cliches of Starbucks and McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken. On the citizen diplomacy level, I consider one of the best citizen culinary diplomats of all time to be Anthony Bourdain, an American legend. He would go everywhere. He would eat everything, and his goal was really to project empathy and to project learning between cultures, between himself and the people he was eating with, but the fact that he was broadcasting this to hundreds of thousands or millions of people around the world, he was really projecting that we're all the same at the end of the day, that we might eat differently, but we can all learn from each other and we can all benefit from sitting around the table. So I think he's definitely one of the superstars of the citizen culinary diplomacy world. So that's that. How do I
Great.
do, Paul? 10 minutes?
That is perfect. You're right on time, Sam.
All right.
Jennifer, if you can go ahead and show your slides.
Okay. Um, let's see. Oh, share. Okay. Yes, I'm Jennifer Gray. I'm an associate professor of modern British and Anglophone literature at Tennessee Tech University.
Jennifer,
And
just a quick, sorry, I made a note in the Zoom chat that in preparation for our discussion, all of you should write some questions or comments. Kevin has already started us on this, which is I much appreciate it, and Begum has likewise posted. So by all means, share your questions or your comments in preparation for our discussion. Go ahead, Jen.
okay, yes. So my book, Culinary Diplomacy's Role in the Immigrant Experience, Fiction and Memoirs of Middle Eastern Women, came out in 2021. And I have to just say that I'm delighted to meet Sam at long last. I've studied his work is foundational for my book. And this is one of those moments that if we were in person, I might never wash this hand again, you know?
That's very sweet. Thank you so
So,
much.
um, so to build on what Sam has been talking about, I dealt with that third pillar exclusively in my book, um, arguing that books would make a good tool for citizen culinary diplomacy. Um, so I use books that fiction and memoirs that particularly have recipes in them because of the engagement that offers. Each of the books I write about involves immigrants in a community opening cafes, inviting people into their homes, and otherwise reaching out to the community to share food and establish relationships, finding similarities and differences and creating cross-cultural bonds. First, I'll share a bit about each author, and then I'll explain how books with recipes function as culinary outreach. I'll begin with Marcia Moran. Coming from an Iranian family who fled the country during the 1979 revolution, Moran reflects that experience in pomegranate soup and rosewater and soda bread. Three sisters who fled the revolution settle in an Irish village and open a cafe. Eventually, the village priest ventures in to welcome them and soon learns that there are cultural similarities. Both cultures offer hot tea to guests. Both have their own versions of lamb and potato soup, among other cuisines. Before long, the villagers begin to respond to the sisters and learn more about each other. The books not only explore recipes to share Persian cuisine, but also offer medicinal properties of foods that's not commonly considered in Western culture. The second author that I write about is Diana Abu Jaber. Though she comes from a Jordanian background, her book Crescent centers on a woman of Iranian and American parentage who cooks Persian food in a cafe near an American university. She cooks with passion in memory of her deceased parents and surprises her patrons when they see a blonde woman cooking authentic Persian food. Abu Jaber's two memoirs also include recipes and reflections of her family, particularly her father, who loved to cook and share foods. He invited people into his home regularly to share food and keep alive the traditions from Jordan that he remembered and longed for. And finally, Donia Baijan's The Last Days of Cafe Layla focuses on a woman of Iranian heritage living in America and whose father remained in Iran after the revolution. His restaurant behind high walls was reminiscent of pre-revolutionary Tehran. His daughter's return after his death ultimately ends in her staying to keep the restaurant going. Then in her memoir, Maman's Homesick Pie, Baijan shares that her family moved to the United States because of the 79 revolution, and that her parents, who were doctors who owned a hospital in Iran, could no longer practice medicine without having to be relicensed, which was challenging with language barriers. She explains her struggle to become a chef instead of a doctor, which was her father's plan for her life. Becoming a cook in her culture was not a role for a woman of her class, although in the West, becoming a chef and particularly attending Le Cordon Bleu in Paris is respected. So in researching fiction and memoirs that include recipes, I explain that books become an extension of citizen culinary diplomacy. I focused on Middle Eastern women authors because in my research, I found that they more often included recipes in their fiction and memoirs than authors from other backgrounds. Constructing books with recipes included is a form of culinary tourism that expands cultural understanding and functions as a medium to explore possible solutions for cultures in conflict. Unlike festivals and pop-ups, which are great, books are tools that allow vicarious exploration of immigrant cultures and are an enduring medium that can be revisited over time and shared with others. They're also readily accessible almost anywhere and anytime. And I suggest that offering books at live culinary events has the potential to extend the experience beyond the closing of the event, giving attendees the opportunity to go deeper into their experience. By including recipes in books, I argue that this enduring medium opens up to draw readers into not only the story, but also to try the recipes. One could see reading books as passive. However, books with recipes invite readers to take an active part in reading about foods and preparing foods that lead to a shared experience, despite the time lapse between the author's experience, the creation of a book, and the time that it's read. When these recipes are made and shared with others, citizen culinary diplomacy reaches even further through the medium of books and serves as a window into experiencing cultures outside one's own and offers the opportunity to open readers' gustatory and cultural awareness as an avenue of citizen culinary diplomacy. I don't mean to sound idealistic about sharing food. It has the potential to be an element in building bridges and opening doors of a relationship. The act of taking food into one's body is an act of trust and desire for connection, a potential basis for opening doors to larger and more complex discussions between people from different cultures. David Sutton coined the term gustomology, which organizes understanding of a wide spectrum of issues around taste and other sensory aspects of food. For example, food and identity and food and heritage, as I referenced in all three authors' fiction and memoirs, involve the preservation of family and or cultural recipes and the sharing of those foods as a connection between people to better understand one's identity. Particularly standing out in Abu Jaber's memoirs of her father, food and memory and food and forgetting are another aspect of cooking and sharing foods that help immigrants retain memories of home and may also help in forgetting where they are as they're transported through the food and memories the food elicits. And as I said already, sharing food and cultural memories with those in new cultures has the potential to create bonds and bridge differences. Cultural theorist Kwame Anthony Appiah wrote this about transcultural understanding. But the great lesson of anthropology is that when a stranger is no longer imaginary, but real and present, sharing a human social life, you may dislike or like him, you may agree or disagree, but if it's what you both want, you can make sense of each other in the end. And my last slide shares a Bedouin proverb that I think best illustrates citizen culinary diplomacy. He who shares my bread and salt is not my enemy. Thank you.
Awesome, Jennifer. And you were under time, which is fantastic. So thank you. Um, we have Daniel Moses, who's otherwise known as Celia, who is his wife, who is our last speaker, talking about his experience doing grassroots people-to-people culinary diplomacy.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Sam and Jennifer, and hi, everybody. I'm going to speak a little bit quickly, and I'll just sketch things out. I did not prepare long notes. I'm actually on the road. I leave for London very soon to go to a peace building NGO that's trying to do work in Israel, Palestine, and I just got back last night, and I'm also a little bit under the weather. So I will just say a little bit about myself and about my work in culinary diplomacy, which is actually just part of my what I would call people-to-people peace building or civic engagement or efforts at self-government and democracy. I think it's all of a piece, and culinary diplomacy is part of that. Um, oh, and by the way, Ramadan Mubarak for those of you who are celebrating Ramadan. I think it's actually interesting that it is Ramadan, which is one example of how food plays a role in culture, when to eat, how to eat, and we happen to be having this during Ramadan, which is a good example of how human beings don't just eat, we create so much around how we eat. So I actually worked with Paul. We taught at Harvard in social studies, and before that, I wrote a PhD in American history, and I was very interested in democracy and self-government and the prospects for self-government. And I was concerned even then, which is in the 90s, about the future of American democracy. And I then went to Armenia, and I lived in Armenia for a couple of years as a civic education project fellow. That's a George Soros funded project that worked with people to people, citizenship. It was trying to rebuild the former Soviet bloc, which failed, obviously, in many ways. 9/11 was a moment of an epiphany for me. And then when I went to Harvard, where I met Paul, I was very interested in theory and practice. I loved the ideas that we were teaching there, but I wanted to get on the ground to apply those ideas about what's happening, to exercise one's sociological imagination, to understand the forces that act upon us, and to engage in dialogue and experiential learning, to learn about one another, to learn cross-culturally, in the hopes that we can figure out how to live together. Because for me, the great issue for human beings on the planet today is whether or not we can live together. And it doesn't look good right now, I have to say. But that's the great challenge that I decided to dedicate my life to. And I started to work with Seeds of Peace. I worked at the camp. They have a camp for young people, but I did not work with the young people. I worked with the educators who brought the young people. And then I moved to Jerusalem in 2006 and lived there for 11 years. And I worked with people from the Middle East, people from South Asia, people from Cyprus, people from Europe, people from the United States of America, mostly educators, scholars, artists, and community leaders. And food was always part of what we did. So I don't know, Paul, if you could can you show some photographs? So I'll just say about the camp. I'll just sketch this out and then we can show the photos and I'll just go quickly through what they are and you'll see. The camp brought together kids from the Middle East and South Asia and Cyprus and the United States. Here's the lineup. This is where we met every morning by a lake in Maine. So not so far, Sam, I think, from where you grew up. I don't know where you grew up in Maine or at least where you went to college. I Googled both of you. So this is in Otisfield, Maine. And if you continue on, Paul, keep going. So every session of camp, we had an international dinner where the educators cooked for the young people. And so the educators I worked with spent days thinking about what to cook, and they wanted to represent their food. And the young people from the different places, the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, the Greek and Turkish Cypriots, the Indians and the Pakistanis and Afghans. Everybody were so excited to eat their own food after weeks of eating the camp food, which not everybody liked very much. It was not hot enough for the South Asians. It was the breakfasts were too sweet. We had issues oh, by the way, at the camp, there was never any pork because of Jews and Muslims. There was never any beef because of Hindus. Um, and so even what we did eat or didn't eat was shaped by who was coming. And during Ramadan, when Ramadan was in the summer, we had to shape the entire camp schedule around Ramadan. But here, this is the international dinner that my people cooked for the whole camp. You can keep going, Paul. That's just where we hung out. So keep going a little bit more. So the educators, these are a few of the educators. We started to work as the United States started to have more obvious trouble with dialogue and self-government. We created a program for American educators. These are some of the American educators. It was a course called Educating in a Diverse Democracy, and we cooked for ourselves too. So this is one of the meals. You can keep going, Paul. That's us sitting together for a meal that we cooked for ourselves. Keep going. We used to go on trips. This is going on. I want to show you. This is an island off the coast of Maine. Keep going. Now, if here we have, wait, no, right there. There's Amanda. She's Palestinian. Amani, who is Egyptian, and Lilach, who is Israeli. And we're going to an island off the coast of Maine. Keep going. Uh, keep going. This is just looking at, and okay, and this is that same session. This is a woman named Zakia. She goes by Z usually. She's a vegan chef, and she came to talk to us about food in America and food deserts, meaning places in the United States that are so poor there are no supermarkets around, and how she herself was trying to create healthy food for people who don't have a lot of money in the United States, especially in urban areas. And that created a whole conversation around food and industrial food, farming, and how that relates to food, and the taste of fruit and vegetables, and why in America, in Walmart, the fruit and vegetables are often so tasteless compared to other places. And what is healthy food? So keep going, Paul.
Hold on a second because I need to get to the next group of
Okay.
slides that you sent me. So,
Okay, so so one of the things that we also had to deal with, and I'll just tell one story while Paul's getting to the next. Um, Well, actually, now you're here. Okay, keep going.
Hold on a second because I've got to get to the next one, next group of slides.
So this is Akia talking about what I just said. Here she's talking about the problems with how we make our food in the United States, how we grow it, and the troubles that people have when they don't have access to fresh food and health and food and culture and food. This is her great passion, and she's a wonderful lecturer. Okay, keep going. There she is. Keep going. That this is so this is my friend Mohammed. He's my colleague now. He's one of the co-founders of the Fig Tree Alliance. He's from Gaza. He doesn't live in Gaza right now, but most of his family escaped from and are now living in Cairo. He actually came to the States and lives in Columbus, Ohio. Um, and keep going. There's a lot about food that I want to tell you about. These are just people. This is the DL house. This is Deb, the other co-founder. The one on the left, looking at the picture, is Deb, who's the other co-founder of the Fig Tree Alliance. This is us saying goodbye to an educator from Syracuse, Mohammed and me and Cindy. So now here we are in the region. So this is in Jerusalem, and this is a USAID funded project for something called Women of Action. I think that's what this one is.
Yes.
Oh yeah, yes. And so this was one. Now, some of you might know USAID has been cut. I was the chief of party for USAID cooperative agreement for many years, and the money came from USAID. So this is a project funded by USAID of mostly women, Palestinian and Israeli women. Keep going. Keep going. Uh, and I used to travel a lot, and educators who I worked with at camp would then invite me to their homes. And so this is Abu Tariq, who is a Palestinian educator, the school principal of a refugee camp high school. And this is his house in Ramallah. So he has a picture of New York City. Keep going. That's his wife, and she made makluba, which is a Palestinian dish. And everywhere I went, I would eat food that the educators made for me, and they would always want to explain what that food was. And so I gained about 30 pounds while living in Jerusalem, actually, which was mostly because I just ate a lot because people would they didn't sit, they wouldn't let me stop. They would just keep refilling my plate. Okay, keep going. This is Ramallah. Keep going.
Oh, I have to get to the next group of
Okay.
slides.
Okay, so one thing I want to say about being in the region, I want to just tell you one story, and then I'll go to these. So Mohammed and I and a group of educators from all around the world were in Cyprus in the summer of 2015, and the Cypriot woman, a Greek Cypriot woman, wanted to create a banquet to share Greek Cypriot culture through food, and she did that, and she made some among the dishes. She made some pork because Greek Christians eat pork. Muhammad came to her before the meal, right when she was putting things down, and he said, "You cannot put that plate of pork on the table." She said, I'll label it, and those who don't want to eat pork won't eat it, and I'll tell everybody that this is pork." He said, "No, this will be too much of an insult to some of my Palestinian friends to even be sitting at a table with pork." And they got into a big argument about it. Because she said, I want to show everyone what my culture is." And he said, I'm interested in your culture, but I will not sit next to some pork. And they argued and actually started to get heated. And in the end, she agreed to take the plate of pork away. So that's one example of some of the difficulties of what we're calling here culinary diplomacy. But it became later they sat and talked, and she really started to understand why for him it was so important to do that, because some of the educators were from very devout religious Muslim backgrounds, and Muhammad was trying to help them to feel comfortable. And he himself didn't care as much about the pork. He was protecting some other people from his perspective. Keep going. This is the wall between Ramallah. That's the wall that divides Ramallah and Jerusalem. I mean, that's the wall that goes around Ramallah. Keep going. Jerusalem food market, where food is everywhere, and there's food from all over the Jewish diaspora. All right. That's more of that. That's a juice guy. And we used to go to the desert. And here I'll just show you. You can keep the landscapes that we went to. This is Sweden. We used to do a fellowship. That's the desert. This is in Sweden, where we went to a restaurant. These are educators and social entrepreneurs and activists from all around the world. And we're eating at a Swedish themed or Viking themed restaurant where we were eating food that was supposed to be the food that the Vikings ate. And later we danced and they wore these silly hats. So everywhere we went, food became a thing. And I very much agree with what was just said by Professor Gray, that if you eat with somebody, you are making it, it creates a relationship, a connection. You're not an enemy any longer if you're eating with somebody. And so this was a great feast. This was the first night actually that we were all together, and they're already dancing and wearing funny hats. Okay, I think I you can just go through the rest. That's Hanoch Piven, who's a famous Israeli artist. And I would just, and we used to do art workshops, but I would say that food is also an art, and how we make food is just as creative and artistic as what Hanoch Piven is trying to do. You could Google him. He's a wonderful collagist who tries to create collage for cross-cultural communication. And now the following photos are just to show you the range of where we went and how different it all was, from the Green Island to the Tel Aviv and the sea to the Maine. This is the lighthouse in Maine, which is where we start out. And everywhere we went, across deserts, across seas, across oceans, food is always important because people need to eat. And culinary diplomacy is part of what I would say is the larger effort of what can be called civic education, civic engagement, people to people peace building. Um, there's so many words for it, but it really comes to the same thing. To what extent can people figure out how to live together?
Fantastic, Daniel. Thank you. That was a really rich conversation. I really appreciate the fact that this time around, this doesn't always happen. We have three speakers kind of giving quite distinct perspectives on this concept of culinary diplomacy. So we're going to move into conversation here. And really want to hear from as many of you as possible. So if you haven't written a comment or anything in the Zoom chat, please do so, because then that can flag it to me to call upon you. We may not be able to get to everything, but want to get to as much as possible. And let's start off with I believe it is Kevin who starts. And Kevin, I don't know if you're still with us. Let me just see. I'm running through. Kevin, are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. Um, if you want to speak to your questions, it would be great rather than me trying to filter your questions.
Okay. Well, I'm involved in a small town in the mountains in New Mexico. We have it's a very international place. We have a real interest in this idea of citizen to citizen diplomacy. We had a sister city in Russia for many years, and because of the whole Putin arrangement, it kind of fell apart. And we still have friends there, but there's really not any opportunity for doing the kind of interchange we used to. So I'm in a nonprofit that's received some funding to help us try to see, can we get any kind of a citizen to citizen diplomacy activity going using like online platform, or doing it virtually using online platforms like Zoom or Google meetings, with the idea that that could potentially lead to in-person things, but it may or may not. And so the challenges I face looking at it all is, are there good examples that I can find to follow? When I think of it with culinary, I imagine, and somebody posted a real neat link to somebody that does soups online, but I don't know how much interaction is involved in that. But imagine having a dinner party virtually with people from a faraway place, and you supply menus to each other, and each of you tries to learn enough to execute the menu that was provided from the other culture, and then have a dinner get together virtually to have interchange, talk about that, and other things that might come in. But I'm not really been finding, we're not only interested in culinary, but we're interested in all kinds. So the challenges are, how do you find the other communities that would have any interest in doing that kind of a interchange, if there are any? And number two, are there good examples out there that might help us to learn from, about what other people learn trying to do similar things?
Great. Really good question because I think, the conversation centered mostly on thus far on in-person culinary diplomacy. So I think you're trying to kind of extend things. So to our speakers, but also to Karen, who's joining us, who's a citizen diplomat, because I think you addressed in the Zoom chat an example, but we'll go to our speakers first, but then Karen, if you could likewise chime in. Any thoughts? This may be, well, actually, I think Jennifer, even though you do kind of literary versions of this, I know you practice this but to Kevin's questions about, some examples of virtual culinary diplomacy and where do you find these people to collaborate with?
I would think that promoting a book group, online on a platform somehow, and then sharing recipes either from a book or constructed, that would give a basis for common discussion through a book. And then I love your idea of everyone making recipes in their own home and sharing an online dinner. I think that's just brilliant.
But how do you find the people who might be interested in that in other faraway places?
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, I know a great example. This is a few years ago, but there was a really cool project in Pittsburgh called Conflict Kitchen. And Conflict Kitchen it was really an art project from a couple of artists at Carnegie Mellon that manifested the actual moment of art was when the it was a restaurant, and when the servers at the restaurant served and talked about the food that was being served, that was the piece of art. And the whole project was that they were serving foods um, from countries that with whom the United States is in conflict, whether it's cold or hot conflict. So they had different pop-ups of Iran and North Korea and Cuba and Iraq and a few others over the course of their project over the course of 4 or 5 years. But when they did their Iran project, um, I don't know how they found the community in Iran. They obviously had a big platform because they had a restaurant, they had publicity, but they ended up setting up a long table in Pittsburgh and another long table in Tehran, and they put a big video screen at the end of each table, so it looked like you were at this super long table that everybody was sitting around. Just the visual of that moment, and had traded recipes ahead of time as you suggested. So that doesn't answer your core question, which was how do you find that community? But there are some really cool examples of that sort of commensality, the idea of sitting together around the table, even if it's not in person.
Kevin, do you have a particular area of the world that your group is interested in?
Well, I live in Los Alamos, New Mexico, which is a big science town. So the ideal thing that's occurred to me, it's a small town, would be to find other small communities that have a big science focus, because there would be other things then in common in terms of things to talk about and compare notes on. So I've actually looked around and visited a couple places. Um, but I didn't know that there might be, just with the internet these days, somebody might know that there's a clearinghouse out there somewhere or a message board or something where you can make connections at. So I think the ideal for us would be a similarly sized community that has kind of a technology science fundamental interest, but it doesn't have to have that, I guess.
So then I would wonder if any of the people who are scientists in your community who are also interested in working with you, if they go to international conferences, I would look for personal relationships, whether they come through associations and conferences of shared interests, whether they come through religious organizations, whether they come through sister city programs, but personal relationships between people.
Yeah, that's what we do. I just didn't know if there's something that's gone beyond that, so that because then it becomes all pretty one-off and what we learned through our sister city relationship, it becomes very personality dependent quite often, and relationship dependent. And if something changes that relationship, then all of a sudden it's hard from a continuity standpoint.
But I
Sister
think,
Cities is kind of such an organization, but
yeah.
they're kind of very bureaucratic and very it's difficult to introduce to go beyond their structures
Then I
that
would
they
avoid
already
their
have.
structures and look for relationships. And
Yeah,
this in the success will really only will depend on the personal relationships. And you could say, well, then it's not sustainable because it's based on the personal, but that's what it's actually based on. And
Mhm.
if and
yeah,
and the personal relationship is stronger often and easier in many ways than the bureaucratic larger organizations that have you do certain things they're slower. And so if scientists are going to conferences and they're meeting people from around the world, that would be one suggestion.
yeah. Appreciate that suggestion. Yeah, we're also kind of just interested after like I'm dead and gone or something. It not just dying with the people and and those kind of things too.
Yeah.
So I think
Um,
it's a need out there, but there just may not be anything like that. So.
yeah, Karen, if Karen Leggett, and Karen, if you can also tell us a little bit about what you do as a citizen diplomat. She just published a new book, a new children's book. So tell us briefly about what you do.
My children's book is Zamzam, which is about a little boy who has grandparents in Egypt and America. It's inspired by my grandchildren because my husband is Egyptian. And it has a little bit of food in it. They have some Egyptian food and they have some American food. And we hope to have another book actually that may focus even more on food. And it's great with kids because they love to talk about. I talked about the book with a group of second graders, and we all talked about the special foods in their families, which were all different kinds. So that's a children's books are a marvelous way to spread cultures and different cultures as well as adult books. And I also mentioned in the chat an organization we have here in the Washington area called Do Kind Works. And it was started as a way for individuals to contribute to create housing for newly arrived refugee families. And they still do that. But now one of the things they do is something called Kind Soups. And every week, everybody gets together on a Zoom and makes soup. And when the Afghan refugees came over, they had a couple of Afghan restaurants do lead the Zoom and to explain to everybody. Everybody made an Afghan soup at the same time, and then we could provide these soups to newly arrived refugees, and they could laugh about the fact that Americans can't make Afghan soup, but they might appreciate the fact that we made the effort. So that and that continues to be one way. And I think Do Kind Works and Kind Soups just started, with everybody's friends, and now it's expanded to be quite a large group in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. So I think it can start small with people who have an affinity, and then it grows because you talk to your friend, and I talk to my friend, and I've added a whole lot of people who are now making soup, and a woman in my building collects the soup from everybody who makes in the building. So you do start one on one, and it may not last beyond you, but you've introduced three or four other people who come in with three or four more people, and I think it grows intrinsically. I also think I'm also part of the Baltimore sister city with Luxor and Alexandria, Egypt, and I think it can sister cities without the bureaucracy can be used to initiate those connections. The biggest problem with the international connections like that, and it's certainly our problem with Egypt, is the time difference. We have 7 hours of time difference. We've tried for a long time to put schools together, and we have to get the kids in school crack of dawn in the morning in the United States and barely before they leave school in Egypt. And you'd have the same problem if you were cooking. But I do think your connections in sister cities could be used to begin building some culinary connections. And the question, and I won't keep continuing, but the question I asked in the chat is how ethnic restaurants can be more effectively involved. In our case, we did have an Afghan restaurant participate in Kind Soups, but we have several Egyptian restaurants in Maryland and Virginia who are very interested in diplomacy and would be interested in ideas for extending diplomacy. And we have one who makes kosheri, which is an Egyptian comfort food, and she wants to make sure that one day kosheri is as familiar to Americans as tacos are. So, what are some of the ideas or things that other people have used or the speakers can suggest for getting restaurant? We have so many ethnic restaurants, particularly in our urban areas. How can these restaurateurs be more involved? Perhaps not as much as Jose Andres is, but that idea.
Great question. Before we move to that question, which I think is really an excellent one, to kind of leverage the many ethnic restaurants that exist across the world into culinary diplomacy. Kevin, one other place, because Sam mentioned Conflict Kitchen in, I think it's Pittsburgh, but there's a place called Immigrant Food in Washington, D.C. It's likewise I think
Planet Word,
yeah, it's
connected to Planet Word.
it's at Planet Word and several other places. And the point is that these places uh, have an interest. So I think Daniel's point is a good one about building through personal relationships. If you have a scientific community in your area, also use the word science diplomacy to find other communities and organizations and so on across the world that do science diplomacy because then you can broach the topic of culinary diplomacy with them. But obviously, it's worth connecting with people who actually do culinary diplomacy. And so places like Conflict Kitchen in Pittsburgh and Immigrant Food in Washington, D.C. are on your side there, and they may be helpful to you in finding families and others across the world who would be interested. So to Karen's question, would love your answers about how do you leverage restaurants? How can restaurants get involved in citizen diplomacy? Sam might be best equipped to answer this, but yeah.
I think restaurants are already, I mean, restaurants are already doing work in citizen diplomacy every day just by existing. I think every time you go to a restaurant from a new country, it's almost the work that we have to do that the restaurant goer has to do to explore and find new ones. I don't almost don't want to put more onus on a restaurant owner to reach out to a community in a way because they're making ends meet and making their margins. And I love all those Afghan restaurants in Northern Virginia, and so many of them are, it's a family or it's a chef and a couple of kids running the place. And I think that there's so much that the rest of us can do to learn something new, to discover something new, and do our research. But on the restaurant side, I mean, with Jose Andres' restaurants, we always try to tell authentic stories. We try to tell true stories about the food we're cooking. So if I'm working on a cookbook right now with Jose about Spanish food, and he has Spanish restaurants that are really trying to teach the guest in a light touch, gentle way about the history of dishes and um, you know, why is there a prevalence of pork in Spanish cooking? It's actually quite a dark history of why there's pork in so many things. I'm testing a recipe for a particular pastry that has lard in it from Mallorca. Um, and the reason is because during the Inquisition, they were throwing pork and everything in order to out the Muslims and the Jews. So it's that sort of thing, the deeper histories of the food that we can't shy away from and say, well, there's so much of Spanish cuisine that comes from the Northern African Berber influence during the Al-Andalus period, or what happened afterwards with the Inquisition, or what happened after that with the import of ingredients from the New World. You wouldn't have Spanish cooking, and you wouldn't have much international food without peppers, tomatoes, and potatoes. And all of those came from Peru and Mexico and that region. So it's really reckoning, and having, if you're a chef or you're a food writer or a food journalist, trying to get deeper into the stories and not just saying this is the food on the plate, but this is why the food made it to the plate and how we can all engage with it. I think that's really valuable tool so that a casual person going into a restaurant, eating a dish will say, that's delicious, and I learned something new.
Hmm. Jennifer or Daniel or anybody else, if you have answers to Karen's question about whether and how restaurants can be involved in culinary diplomacy. And by the way, Sam, I think you're right. You know, restaurants are just struggling very often to just stay alive and get people to eat their food in their restaurants. But culinary diplomacy can actually be a way to draw people to their restaurants.
Absolutely.
So we're just wondering, Daniel.
Yeah, well, actually, so we used to do, but when you saw those people with the Viking hats, that was for a group of social entrepreneurs. We would meet in Stockholm every year, and one of them created an initiative in Maine with Somali immigrants where they created pop-up restaurants all over to teach about Somali cuisine. So the in this case, the culinary diplomacy was part of their business plan, and they did pop-up restaurants all over the place. So if there are immigrants in communities that are looking for ways to make a living, it might be that this is a potential way to actually create a business too. Um, it doesn't help if they don't exist in one's community, but for those who work with immigrants and refugees, it's a possible source of income, I think.
Yeah, that's great.
And Karen, I'm thinking we need to have a conversation about this because we want to kind of spread, kind of localize international relations as an organization. Citizen Diplomacy International is one thing we do, but it's strictly international, and rooting it in the DC area would be interesting to me. So having a conversation with you about that would be much appreciated. There are some people here we do not have much information for. Mark Pixley, if you could introduce yourself in the Zoom chat. Khalid, who's joining us from Pakistan, just joined us. If you could just put your name, your city, your country, and your email in the Zoom chat. If you don't want to share your email, you can share it to Adrian Mata. He's our intern. He's in on the call. He's waving his hand. And then Dr. Jocelyn Fletcher, who's actually a diplomat from St. Lucia, is joining us. But if you can likewise put your information, so your name, your first name, your last name, your city, your country, and your email. We are really trying to keep track of attendance and who's coming from where. And there are some people here we have not heard from, so would love to hear from you. I'm thinking Maria Blanco, we've not, I don't know if I've seen, I may have seen you at a prior meeting, but I apologize if I don't remember. We have Chia Terrence, who's joining us from United Arab Emirates, but comes from Cameroon. We have Brian Smith and Layla from the USA. I don't know Zarangi's iPhone. I don't know where you're coming from and whether you've introduced yourself in the Zoom chat, but please do. We've got Maria Germano who's joining us from the US. She's actually going to be speaking at the end of this meeting about our citizen diplomacy bulletin. We've got Joshua Kisubika joining us from Uganda. And I'm just trying to, Maureen Hurley. I don't know if you have introduced yourself in the Zoom chat, but by all means, please do introduce yourself. And then if you have any questions, go ahead and chime in. It's probably useful if you would use your electronic hand, just as Joshua just did, because that'll give me a sense of if you want to make a comment or ask a question. Would love to hear again from those of you who have not spoken yet. Joshua.
Thank you so much, Paul. My name is Joshua. I'm from Uganda, East Africa. I just want to, I have a friend in Seattle. She's called Bettina Kare, and she's the owner of Seattle Means Business, the owner of Seattle Means Business magazine. She usually holds these culinary dinners. And when you're discussing this, I got so interested to learn, and I think it's the best way to scale this kind of diplomacy. Maybe I would, I don't know, I would interest Sam and Jennifer. I don't know, or Paul, how they can get in touch with her. She usually holds the I think monthly supper clubs at a home, and many people come around. I think when I last checked on her, she was telling me 40 plus people come to our home and they share these different culinary, these different foods, and that's one way I hope this can be scaled. Thank you so much. I just wanted to chip in that.
Great. Thanks, Joshua. Others who have not spoken yet but have questions in the Zoom chat. Layla, do you want to share what you've been doing?
Sure. I mean, throughout this meeting, I've been realizing that I have dozens of examples of culinary diplomacy that I've engaged in, just as a citizen often. But most recently, I met someone through Abrahamic House, which is an interfaith through mainly the three Abrahamic religions who come together, and she and I kind of naturally have been hosting or co-organizing these monthly interfaith food sustainability dinners where people will contribute a dish and then we'll have these discussions about the food that we brought and how it intermixes with food sustainability and environmental protection and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of, I know her focus has mainly been on nutrition, and she has engaged a lot more in the mix between religion and diet, I guess is one way to put it. And at this point, we'll have between like 2 people and 20 people come. You're welcome to join if you'd like. Just I guess message me privately. Unfortunately, we can't do hybrid yet, but maybe someday. So yeah, this is in the DC area, by the way.
In the Washington, D.C. area, capital of the United States, just in case you don't know. Mark, and if you could tell us what country and city and country you're joining.
Well, I'm joining from France right now. I'm actually based in China. But I put a little, I got introduced to this group through Andreas Fulda in UK, and we've done a lot of work. But I just got your notice earlier today, and I thought, oh, this would be an interesting conversation, and it was. And I added a little contribution into the chat, which is my colleague, a good friend of mine, has helped put together a community kitchen up in Brussels. And in connection with that, we've ended up putting together a library, a cookbook library, where people could come in. This is actually part of my mother's cookbook collection. So she brought a portion of that up to Brussels. And it's right in the middle of the ethnic community. And so all the cooks in the kitchen are different people. They're Tibetan, they're Muslim, and that sort. But it's a very interesting mixture. So it sounds like what you guys are talking about. So I shared that. So.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. Mark, if I may ask, what do you do for work that has you based in China and going to and living in Force, visiting?
I'm a facilitator, which means that I work with different organizations on helping them think together. That's how I got to know Andreas Fulda, because he was in China, and we did a thing called the EU-China Civil Society Dialogue, which were about 8 sets of dialogue, 3 days long, where we had about 100, 150 people, both European and Chinese, looking at big issues.
Gotcha.
And so I was the facilitator around that. And I do that sort of work in various places around the world, including India right now. A lot of work with some of the Christian colleges.
Great. Andreas Fulda is just for those of you who don't know him, is a professor in international relations based in England, but comes from Germany and basically studies European Union China relations. And so others who haven't spoken yet, Maria Blanco, do you want to chime in? And where are you joining us from?
Hi, yes, I'm actually in Caracas, Venezuela, in South America. I actually recently graduated from the University of Texas, but I have relatives still here in Caracas, and I know the director of a new international relations school being developed in a university here in Caracas. So I'm assisting with this initiative, and so we received an email from the organization, and I yeah, I wanted to attend to learn more about this interesting um, topic. And I do have a question that's more historic, but I think it's pertinent about, whether Italy's strong association with its cuisine was something that was intentional by the government, especially after World War II, or if it was just something that developed more naturally through tourism and trade and all of these other factors, especially since I studied Italian. So we had events where we like cooked tiramisu and very diverse group of people would meet up. So yeah, thank you.
By the way, you may have heard of Italy. It's a kind of restaurant that's all about promoting, but it's a massive building in Rome, and then they've expanded to New York and then other places. But it's basically a building with regional foods on different floors, and then it's a supermarket as well. So they carry those regional foods, so you can eat them on site, but you can also buy them. It's brilliant. I imagine more countries may be doing this kind of thing because it's good for business and good for promoting their regions. But Jennifer, Sam, Daniel, any thoughts on Maria's question?
I don't know anything about the Italian case. I don't know about how Italy has treated food and diplomacy. A lot of one of the big theories at the beginning of the world of culinary diplomacy, the writing about it was that it was being used mostly by quote unquote middle powers, um, Thailand, Peru, South Korea, countries that don't have the G8 or the might of the European Union or United States behind them, and not even the BRICS either. But in more recent years, there's been more entry from. I mean, France has doubled down on it. It seems like France has always been using culinary diplomacy, but they've actually put effort behind it, as has Spain in recent years. So there's a good chance that Italy has done the work behind the scenes um, that promotes their cuisine in a more intentional way. But I'm not. I don't know. I haven't seen a particular case study or any writing specifically about Italy.
Daniel or Jennifer, any thoughts?
No,
Okay.
can't add to that.
Yeah. But check out Italy because that is one answer to your question. It's eat as in not EAT Tali. It's worth checking out because I think that's a fantastic model for the well, it's business and country to foreign peoples kind of culinary diplomacy. Dr. Jocelyn is sharing, I think for some reason, her uh, her a photo of her. But in any case, if you could, um, there we go. Okay. Um,
I, I was not, hello. I just wanted to chime in and say greetings from St. Lucia and that I have been a member of this group for the past 6 years. I have found it very, very interesting. I have learned quite a lot. I've shared what we are doing in St. Lucia, what has been happening, our interest in the diaspora, our interest in diplomacy, the what this group has been fantastic. I wish my country could have been more involved. I'm still learning to see what we can contribute or what we can do. But I just want to say to you, thank you for have been with me and keeping me on for the past 6 years.
you're welcome, Dr. Fletcher. Do you want to briefly explain your role in St. Lucia?
I have been a regional international national diplomat for many years, working in with regional and international organizations like CARICOM and the COMSEC and DFID. However, the position of Ambassador of Diaspora Affairs is being involved with the diaspora of our country around the world and seeing about their needs as it pertains to their homeland. And so it takes up a lot of traveling to the various countries where our diaspora are, meeting with the various groups and organizations of diaspora associations, um, enabling them and helping them to return to our country, to deal with the needs that they may have with the country where they reside, helping them to give back to the homeland, helping them if they need to purchase homes or properties or open businesses in the homeland, dealing with their legal issues and issues of citizenship and passports, birth certificates. It's everything
Yeah.
that they possibly need. We are helping them with that.
We had a meeting on excuse me, not family diplomacy, on diaspora diplomacy last year. And so you can look that up on our YouTube channel, if it's of interest to you. There are some people you may want to connect with. I do want to we're approaching the end of the meeting, and I do want to get to a question that somebody posed from Turkey who had to leave, but is an important question. And I'm trying to like pull it up, but essentially, and this gets to Sam, you and I have had discussion offline about this, or online, I can't remember actually, in conversation by phone about it gets back to this question of measuring the impact of culinary diplomacy. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the challenges of measuring the impact of culinary diplomacy?
Yeah. To me, I mean, this is the number one challenge for this entire field is how do you unless there's a specific goal in mind, which the Thai program was very clear about. They were trying to expand the number of Thai restaurants in the world. They were trying to increase the number of Thai exports. Um, Without that sort of benchmark, it's hard to show a return on investment. I mean, you can. I'd love to hear from the others. Um, Daniel and Jennifer, from your work, especially Daniel's work, how in the room where a conversation is happening, where folks are sharing food from different cultures, you can see a change. There's a palpable increase. There's the scholar in the 1950s, Gordon Allport, wrote about the contact theory, which has been expanded over the following decades, about how mere contact or pleasurable contact, being in the same space, sharing, having discussion, increases the likelihood of good relationships between folks. And I think that's really compelling. But on a bigger scale, or once you leave the room, it's really hard to quantify the impact of those in room conversations. So Daniel, I'd love to hear your take on this as
Yeah,
well.
I mean, this is something that I actually get upset about, not related specifically to culinary diplomacy, but to education in general. You can measure certain things like math aptitude, but when you go into people-to-people work and changes in attitude and the measurement of how social movements grow or how public opinion changes, you're getting into social science will never have full answers to this, and the idea that we will have full answers is just ridiculous. And one like when Martin Luther King was working as a great civil rights leader in the United States, they were not doing this. They were not measuring and evaluating and spending so much time and energy trying to show that such and such works. They were just doing the work. And the reason I get so upset about it is because I was the chief of party for USID cooperative agreement. So much of our time and energy was put into evaluation, and so much money gets put into evaluation. And the evaluations, we did attitudinal studies of people who have been through Seeds of Peace programs. We brought in consultants that cost a lot of money. It sucks up the energy and time that could be put into actually doing the work. But unfortunately, so much of the large funders, the government funders who now in the USAID case no longer exist, it just takes a tremendous amount of energy that I would argue there's certain things we don't need to prove immediately through social science, and we can just keep doing because we can see we know that it's good or we feel that it's good and try it out. And so the urge to measure and prove something when it comes to this kind of work, I would argue is counterproductive at some level. Although I also know, having been the chief of party person and I've had to go to the USID meetings and talk to their people and the evaluators, I know that this is how they work and this is how social policy they are doing it like this. So you have to play in some way, use the language, but I am extraordinarily skeptical of how this operates, not just in culinary diplomacy, but in education more broadly and in the measurement of social movements.
Well, anybody else want to comment on, Daniel, your point well taken. It's difficult, and it's frustrating, and it sounds like it's keeping it's sapping energy from the actual work.
Unbelievable amounts of energy.
Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Uh, Khalid, you have your hand raised. Do you want to go ahead and speak? You are muted. You need to unmute.
Okay. All right. Is it unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. I was just responding and would agree with exactly what he was saying because I was on the other part. I was working with the USAID in the Islamabad, Pakistan mission. And to be very honest, I think there was a multi-million dollars contract for the monitoring and evaluation. To my best of my knowledge, I have never seen any report for evaluation or monitoring that would have shown the bad effects of the inputs which USAID was providing. Because perhaps it was MSI, the main contractor for this multi-million dollar monitoring evaluation contract. They would report the things which USAID likes to hear.
Yeah.
That was something very, really astonishing. Perhaps keeping those things in view, now I feel that the action which has been taken by the current government is absolutely valid. Because we have, I think, taxpayers' money was disbursed like anything, like charity, like anything. You name it, and it was being disbursed like that. And all those reports, even if you talk about USAID, OIG, I told them that this is what we are getting out of it. There would never be any action. The only thing we get is something very good, astonishing, fantastic. You may add up these things. This is what had been happening. Just my small bit of my personal experience.
Yeah.
So can I just understand? So you think because the monitoring evaluation was just pandering to what the USAID people wanted, you think it's good that it was all cut?
No, I say it's not good. The monitoring evaluation needs to be inbuilt in every project instead of having a third-party contract. Because the third party is interested only in the contract, not in the well-being of the project or the USAID. That's what I say.
So I do, because we're getting slightly off track and getting into discussions around funding and evaluation and so on more broadly and the problems therein. But I do want to come back just for a final point to something that Daniel pointed out early on. In an example of that, the woman who wanted to serve pork because that was part of her culinary heritage and got into an argument, a fairly heated argument with a guy who said, look, we can't have pork for, certain groups of people and so on. And I think it does underscore that, culinary diplomacy can be a double-edged sword. It can be used to bring people together, but it can be used actually to drive divisions between people, whether that's done intentionally or accidentally. And so you might all remember the French farmer who once bulldozed a McDonald's in France. Clearly food can be a source for conflict and not just for peace building. So I hope this was to me, this was a very rich and interesting discussion. I really want to thank our speakers. I want to transition. We have just one thing to to share with you. And Maria Germano is joining us who's actually, speaking of, she's not USAID, but she was former State Department, and she's now kindly helping me with the CDI bulletin, which comes out quarterly with these meetings. So I'm going to share my screen, and she's going to go through this newest newsletter, which you will receive via email if you are sharing with us. Sorry, I need to pull up the right thing and pull up hold on a second. I think it's here. No, it's not here. It's here. There we go. And so go ahead, Maria.
Hello, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. I will try to be brief since I know time is short. But as you can see, the March issue of the bulletin very focused on the theme, noting here that the Future Food Institute will be actually holding gastrodiplomacy boot camps in Italy. They are going to have 2 sessions, one in June, one in July. It's an interactive program, very focused on, training in sustainable development of global food systems, and also focusing on sort of culinary activism. So I think very timely set of issues given the topic today. You'll see a link at the bottom of the page for more information there. Another sort of timely topic that was discussed today a little bit, Sister Cities International. Good to know that a lot of people are very aware of this group. They're very, very active, and they are having in June a youth leadership summit in Washington, D.C. I would note that it is focused on future diplomats. So they're targeting participants from the ages of 14 to 18. And then the Academy of Cultural Diplomacy is holding a forum in New York focused on promoting democracy and peace through dialogue and cultural diplomacy. And it is looking to have, government, non-government, and global representatives participate to help in looking at how the UN's role in conflict situations. Sort of important topic. The Headway Institute of Strategic Alliance is hosting a youth fellowship in August. Again, sort of focused on the future, focused on young change makers. Think that could be an interesting. There's a link as well for further information. And then hopefully a number of you are aware of the European External Action Service. It's sort of the EU's diplomatic arm. There's a link there. Hopefully there's a link there for grants that they are giving out. I would note that the page is very fluid. And so I think it's a good bookmark page. It will have a lot of different kinds of programming that is going to country specific and thematic specific. So would take a look at that and look at the variety of things that they're posting for there. And then we've got some articles and books. And again, on those, I would sort of note the first 2, particularly on gastrodiplomacy. And then I think finally, since we're running out of time, we've updated the bulletin. It is now focused with profiles of our 3 wonderful speakers, and I want to thank all of them for their contributions today. And I hope everyone will take a look at the Q&A there, talking a little bit more about their own work.
Great. So you will get this, as I mentioned, the CD bulletin in the mail via email in the next week or so. If you are signed up for our newsletter and for CDI, I just want to share with you one last things, which are the upcoming meetings for our upcoming 3 quarterly meetings. Let me put that in the Zoom chat. Hold on a second. And then also just a note that, again, you can join if you haven't seen this already, join CDI on Facebook and LinkedIn to connect with folks, share what you're doing in citizen diplomacy, follow us. There will be, this recording will be posted to that YouTube channel. So you want to follow us if you're not already doing so on YouTube. And our remaining meetings this year are on public diplomacy and citizen diplomacy. That's happening on June 3rd. Authoritarianism and citizen diplomacy on September 3rd, and environmental diplomacy on December 2nd. So again, want to thank our speakers and thank you for your active participation in this what was really a rich conversation around culinary diplomacy. Daniel, Jennifer, Sam, thanks again. Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you all.